Poor nurse couldn't afford a dress. Then her patient's father, a single-dad CEO, millionaire, asked, "Will you be my first date?" The monitor beeped in uneven pulses, echoing the tension inside the room. Sophie's small body jerked softly under the blanket, her breaths rapid and shallow. Her eyes blinked in confusion, unfocused. She was only 3, but this sterile room and its machines had become too familiar. Another seizure. Another storm. "We need to administer diazepam now," the physician said sharply, pulling a vial from the drawer. "Wait," Maya said, stepping forward, her voice calm but insistent. "Just give me a minute. Please." The doctor paused, frowning. The nurse at the monitor shot her a look of surprise. "You have 60 seconds, the doctor muttered. Maya walked over to Sophie's bed as if approaching something sacred. The child flinched. Maya gently scooped her up, holding her against her chest. Sophie was stiff, her muscles taut. Maya swayed slowly, and then she began to sing, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. The room seemed to still. The beeping of the monitor remained, but steadier now. Sophie's tiny shoulders began to relax. Her hands, once clenched, loosened and found the fabric of Maya's scrubs. Her cheek pressed against Maya's collarbone. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." By the time the verse ended, Sophie's breaths had quieted. Her body was calm. Her grip was gentle but sure. The danger had passed. Behind the privacy curtain, Adam Reyes stood frozen. He had come to check on his daughter again, but stopped in his tracks at the sound of that voice. That song. It had been 2 years. His wife used to sing that exact lullaby every night before bed. Even on the hardest nights, she hummed it into the baby monitor while Sophie struggled with her condition. And then, after the funeral, the music had stopped. Until now. Adam gripped the curtain and then let go. His hand shook slightly. He didn't move, didn't speak, afraid to break whatever spell had taken hold of the room. Maya, unaware of him, held Sophie with the care of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She whispered something into Sophie's hair as the child blinked sleepily, then laid her gently back down and covered her with the blanket. It was the first time Adam saw her, not just as a nurse or a figure in scrubs passing in and out of his daughter's life, but as someone who had reached into Sophie's silence and soothed it. Someone who remembered how to be gentle when the world had forgotten. Later he learned her name was Maya Thompson. She was 30, working night shifts as she finished her nursing degree. Quiet, reliable, kept to herself. Some nurses said she worked 2 other jobs to stay afloat. No one knew much more. Maya never lingered. She came in, did her work, and left quietly. She lived alone, downtown, in a small apartment. Adam learned this not because he asked, but because people noticed. Maya was the kind of person who disappeared into the background, unless someone needed help. Then, suddenly, she was the only one who mattered. For the last 3 months, Maya had been assigned to Sophie's wing. It hadn't been deliberate, just a scheduling change, but something had shifted. After Sophie's mother passed, the little girl stopped speaking. Her words just disappeared. Though she could hear, though she could understand, Sophie never responded. She didn't cry, didn't laugh. The only thing that soothed her was familiarity, routine, quiet, dim lights. Even Adam had to speak to her gently, as if she might shatter. But that night, when Maya sang, Sophie had reached out, and for the first time in 2 years, she held on. Adam ran a small chain of bookstores across the state. After losing his wife, he stepped back, handing over day-to-day operations. He buried himself in routine, same as Sophie. He had no room for anything else. Grief didn't leave space for hope. And yet, in that hospital room, he had felt something stir. Not love, not quite. Something quieter. Something like breath. Hope. He watched Maya turn to speak to the doctor, still unaware of the impact she'd made. Adam backed away slowly and stepped into the hallway, the white lights humming softly overhead. Nurses passed, voices hushed, but to Adam, everything felt different now. He had watched a stranger walk into his daughter's storm and calm it. No fanfare, no reward, just kindness. He didn't know her yet, not her history, her reasons for the quiet way she moved through the world, but he knew one thing. He wanted to. And if this quiet beginning stirs something in you too, don't forget to tap the hype button. Some stories deserve to be heard, especially the ones that begin with a whisper. The morning started like any other. Gray sky, the sharp smell of early rain, and a bus that was 10 minutes late. Maya stood at the curb in her scrubs, holding a paper cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. Her backpack felt heavier than usual, not from books, but from fatigue. 2 jobs, full-time coursework, and the emotional weight of caring for children like Sophie did not exactly leave room to breathe. She was crossing the last intersection before the hospital when a car turning too fast on a yellow light clipped the edge of her backpack. The jolt knocked her sideways. She caught herself with her palms against the pavement, scraping her knee, coffee splashing across the sidewalk. The driver didn't even stop. A man in a suit glanced at her from across the street, but kept walking. Typical, Maya thought. She got up slowly, brushed dirt off her hands, and limped to the staff entrance of the pediatric wing, arriving 5 minutes before her shift started. No one noticed the slight drag in her right leg as she moved through the hallway. She didn't tell anyone. What was the point? This was just life. You kept walking. The shift was busy. Sophie had a restless morning, refusing breakfast and curling into herself when the physical therapist arrived. Maya spent extra time coaxing her out of bed, offering a lavender-scented cloth, softly narrating each step of the morning routine. At one point, Sophie's toy elephant rolled under the bed. Maya crouched down to retrieve it, her knees stiff, a quiet hiss escaping her lips as she straightened up. Unbeknownst to her, Adam had been watching from the doorway, his arms crossed. He did not speak, did not ask. He just stood there for a moment, then turned and walked away. Maya tucked the elephant under Sophie's arm and continued as if nothing happened. By the end of the shift, her body felt like stone. She didn't realize how deep the bruise had formed under her scrubs. She headed to the break room to retrieve her things, opened her locker with a sigh, and froze. Inside, resting on the folded edge of her spare jacket, was a small, clear bag. It contained a box of pain relief gel, 2 packets of medicated plasters, and a roll of compression wrap. Taped to the side was a piece of paper, torn from a notepad, with a single sentence written in careful handwriting. "Take care. Someone is watching." There was no name, no initials, just the words. Maya stared at the note for a long moment. A quiet warmth stirred in her chest. Confusion, gratitude, and something else she could not name. She looked around the empty break room, half expecting someone to jump out and claim it was a joke. No one came. Later, she asked a few nurses casually if someone had been in her locker. They all shook their heads. A few raised eyebrows. One joked about having a secret admirer. Maya just smiled politely and tucked the note into her pocket. That night she sat in her apartment, the lights low, Sophie's patient chart open beside her textbooks. But her mind wasn't on the dosage tables. She kept thinking about the pain relief gel in her bag, about the careful way the items had been chosen. Nothing over the counter or random, all appropriate for soft tissue trauma. Someone had noticed her limp. Someone had cared enough not to ask questions. Someone had wanted her to feel seen without feeling embarrassed. It was such a small thing, but sometimes small things come like rain after a drought. Sometimes it's just right. She lay down that night with her hand resting over her leg, not from pain anymore, but from thought. In another room, Adam sat at the edge of a chair beside Sophie's bed, watching his daughter breathe steadily in sleep. The lullaby from the night before still echoed in his memory, softer than sound, but louder than silence. He remembered the way Maya had winced when she knelt, how she had said nothing, still focused on Sophie. He did not write the note for recognition. He did not expect her to know it was him. It was just something he could do. That was all. But he did not sleep easily that night, because kindness, when given without name, has a strange way of echoing back. The call came just after lunch. Maya was washing her hands at the nurse's station when her name echoed from the intercom. Maya Thompson to the administrative office. Immediately. The tone was sharp, final. A few heads turned. She dried her hands slowly, willing herself to stay calm, but by the time she reached the elevator, her palms were damp again, this time from nerves. Inside the office, the air felt too still. Dr. Kelman sat behind his desk, a senior administrator beside him, arms folded. A file lay open, a report clipped to the top. "Maya," Kelman began, "the blood panel results from Sophie Reyes's case last Tuesday. Where are they?" Maya's stomach dropped. "They were sent to the lab. I triple-checked the forms." "They were logged in," the administrator cut in, "but the vials were never received. You were the last in the chain of custody." Her voice caught. "That was the night Sophie had a seizure. I remember rushing in to help. I put the vials in the transport box." But the words sounded thin in the silence. Kelman closed the folder. "Until this is resolved, we're placing you on temporary suspension." The room tilted. She opened her mouth but only managed, "Please, I didn't misplace anything." Kelman gave a short nod toward the door. That evening, Adam stood at the end of the pediatric hallway, frowning. A different nurse was tending to Sophie. When he asked about Maya, the answers were vague. "Hugh's not on shift today. Probably a swap." But a young tech whispered something else. "There's a situation with a lost lab sample. She might be suspended." Adam remembered that night clearly. Sophie had seized badly. Maya had barely left her side. There was no way she'd neglected protocol. He made 2 calls. One to security, one to someone in records. The next morning, Maya sat in her apartment, her work badge tucked away, trying to calculate how long she could last without a paycheck. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Kelman's assistant. "Please report to office, matter resolved." She returned, shoulders tense. "We reviewed the footage," the administrator said. "It shows you handing off the box to a lab tech at 6:42 p.m. "I told you," Maya whispered. "The tech failed to log it properly. You're reinstated." She nodded, slowly. "Who reviewed the footage?" The administrator hesitated. "Mr. Reyes. He personally requested access and found the timestamp." Her breath caught. Back in the pediatric wing that afternoon, Maya stepped into Sophie's room. The little girl lit up, arms outstretched, no longer shy or afraid. Maya knelt beside her, hugging her gently. Adam stood by the window, looking tired. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. She rose, walked over. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said softly. "But you did." He shrugged. "You were doing your job, taking care of my daughter. Someone had to speak up." "Why help me?" she asked. Adam glanced away, then back. "Because someone needed to." Maya didn't answer. But back at the nurse's station, she pulled a folded note from her pocket and quietly scribbled on the back of a supply slip. "Maybe not everyone sees me as a shadow." She tucked it into her locker, where no one would see. She would never tell Adam how much it meant, but something inside her had shifted. Not every defense needed to be loud to matter. Sometimes the quietest ones said the most. The hospital was buzzing with quiet excitement. Posters for the annual pediatric gala appeared in every hallway, adorned with stars, teddy bears, and pastel fonts. It was a big event, something the hospital held each year to raise funds for critical children's cases. Doctors prepped speeches, administrators organized silent auctions, and nurses whispered about dresses and dates in the break room. Maya tried to keep her head down. When the invitation came through internal email, she barely glanced at it before hitting delete. It was not that she did not care, she did. But the thought of standing in a ballroom, surrounded by polished shoes, shimmering gowns, and confident laughter, made her stomach twist. She had no dress, no money to buy one, no time between her shifts and night classes. But beyond the practicalities, there was something deeper. She did not belong there. Not in that world. Not in chandeliers and champagne and polite applause. Her place was beside hospital beds, in quiet rooms with beeping monitors, where her hands could do something useful. She told herself it was fine. The evening before the gala, she stayed late to organize Sophie's meds. The little girl had fallen asleep early, clutching a stuffed lamb someone had donated last week. The hallway outside the pediatric wing was empty as Maya walked toward the staff room to grab her coat. That was when she saw him. Adam stood by the door, holding a long, rectangular box wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with a navy ribbon. He looked awkward, like he had rehearsed something but was already regretting it. From his grandfather's recordings, Adam recalled, "Here." She stopped a few feet away. "I didn't expect you," she said. He hesitated. "I know this is last minute, and probably presumptuous." She raised an eyebrow, gently. "I heard you're not going to the gala," he continued. "And that's perfectly okay. I just thought, if you changed your mind." He held out the box. Her heart beat a little faster. "I hope you don't take this the wrong way," he said, lowering his voice. "But I saw this and thought it might suit you. It's simple, and I know I'm not someone who does this often." There was a pause, then he added quietly, "Will you be my first date? In a long time?" Maya blinked, caught completely off guard. He was serious. Not charming, not coy, just sincere. Nervous, even. She took the box, her fingers brushing his, just for a moment. The warmth startled her more than she expected. He didn't wait for an answer. "No pressure," he said softly. "Just think about it." And then he turned and left. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the box for a long time before untying the ribbon. Inside was a deep sapphire dress, folded neatly in white tissue. It was elegant but understated, the kind of dress someone might wear to a quiet, meaningful celebration. No sequins, no dramatic cut. Just a soft drape, a gentle neckline, and a kind of quiet strength in the stitching. She held it up against her. It looked perfect. Suspiciously perfect. She stepped into it carefully, pulling it over her shoulders and standing in front of the mirror. It fit like it had been made for her. That was when she noticed the note tucked into the corner of the box. A small card, handwritten in a firm, slanted style. She never got the chance to wear it. "I thought maybe now is the right time for it to live." Maya's breath caught. She folded the card slowly, pressing her fingers into the crease. Of course. The dress was not just a dress, it had a story, a memory, a weight. It had belonged to Adam's wife. Suddenly the perfect fit no longer felt like a compliment, it felt like a ghost. Maya sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, still wearing the dress. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror, elegant, composed, and entirely unsure of who she was anymore. The dress was beautiful, but she could not help feeling like she was borrowing someone else's place. The grand ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, casting golden light over tables dressed in white linen and polished silverware. The hospital's annual gala was in full swing, glasses clinked, conversations hummed, and soft music floated through the room like warm perfume. Maya stood near the entrance, frozen for a moment. The second she stepped in, something shifted. Not a real hush, but a perceptible change in the air, as if her presence had tilted the room's focus. She could feel the eyes, curious, surprised, some warm, some not. In her sapphire gown, her golden hair swept into a soft bun, she was unrecognizable, even to herself, not the exhausted pediatric nurse in sensible shoes and worn scrubs. Tonight, she felt like a borrowed version of someone else, someone who belonged here. A few guests offered polite compliments. "You look lovely." "Didn't even recognize you." She smiled, nodded, kept walking. Then, as she neared the refreshment table, she heard it. "Isn't that the dress?" "What do you mean?" "From his wife. I saw her holding it once. It was for their anniversary gala. She died that fall." A pause. "I didn't realize he kept it, and now it's on her? Did he seriously give that to a nurse?" "That's bold. Looks great. But still, who does that? Dressing the new girl in the last one's memory? God, that gives me chills. No offense, but isn't it a little sad? She's sweet, but maybe just a stand-in. They didn't know she was near, or maybe they didn't care. The room didn't dim, but Maya felt like it had. Her chest tightened. She turned away, gripping the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. Her fingers dug into the fabric. She hadn't wanted to come. She'd told herself she wasn't ready, that she didn't belong, and now strangers had voiced the exact fear she had tried to silence. She wasn't the woman Adam had once loved, and she never would be. The dress didn't just fit her body, it fit someone else's memory, and suddenly, she couldn't tell if that had been the intention all along. She slipped away before dessert. No goodbyes, just the echo of her heels on the hallway tile. The quiet outside felt better than the storm inside her chest. Back home, she didn't change. She stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, coat on the floor, dress still clinging, like a question she didn't want to ask. The woman looking back at her was elegant and entirely unfamiliar. She stared at her reflection, then whispered, "You weren't chosen because you're you. You were chosen because you fit a space someone else left behind." Her throat tightened. Anger flickered, not at Adam, but at herself, for believing, even for a moment, that she belonged in that ballroom, that she could be someone's first date again. Then came the guilt, the thought that she had stepped into a sacred memory without realizing it, and maybe that meant she didn't belong there at all. She unzipped the dress carefully, folded it gently, and slid the box beneath her bed. The next morning she called the hospital and requested a shift reassignment. No explanation. She replied to Adam's text with a simple, "Thank you for last night." Nothing more. She left the rest unread. For days she moved quietly through the pediatric wing, avoiding his path, clinging to routine. Charts, meds, numbers. Data was easier than feelings. But she missed Sophie's laugh, Adam's soft voice, the lightness in her chest when she was around them, like maybe, just maybe, she could start again. Still, every time she considered going back, she heard those voices. "You're just a replacement. You fit the memory. You're not her." So she stayed away. Because if she let herself feel everything, the fall would hurt more. And deep beneath it all, a wound she had never dared name, the guilt from her sister's death, still whispered to her that love was dangerous. Because loving people meant you might lose them. And Maya Thompson wasn't sure she could survive losing again. The hospital hallways were quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that came only at the end of a long, cold year. Outside the windows, the world was preparing for fireworks and midnight kisses. Inside, Maya was just finishing her shift, tugging her coat from the back of the break room chair and rubbing tired eyes. She was halfway to the exit when a nurse from pediatrics came rushing down the hall. "Maya, room 417, Sophie's having a seizure. A bad one." The words hit like a slap. Maya dropped her coat and ran. By the time she reached the room, chaos had already taken hold. The night doctor was prepping a sedative, monitors blaring erratically. Sophie's small body arched, trembling uncontrollably, her face pale and slick with sweat. Adam stood in the corner, frozen, hands clenched and shaking. His eyes found Maya's the second she entered. No one told her what to do. She crossed the room, climbed onto the bed, and pulled Sophie into her arms, careful with the IV lines. The child's body was stiff and jerking, but Maya held her close, shielding her. She whispered something, then louder. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The same lullaby, again and again, her voice cracking but steady. "You make me happy when skies are gray." The tremors slowed. Sophie's breathing evened out, hitching through soft sobs. Her fingers gripped Maya's scrubbed top, her forehead pressed against Maya's collarbone. The alarms dulled. The doctor stepped in and administered the sedative. The crisis passed. But nothing broke the stillness of that moment. Maya, rocking gently, singing through tears, and the little girl who had once never spoken, now whimpering softly in her arms. Adam collapsed to the floor. He slid down the wall, legs splayed, hands over his face. The room emptied slowly, but his storm had just begun. When everything calmed, Maya lowered herself beside him, still holding Sophie. "I thought I lost her," he whispered. "You didn't," Maya replied softly. "I've never been that afraid in my life," his voice broke. "Not even when they told me my wife wouldn't make it." She didn't speak. Her presence was quiet, grounding. "And I've never—" he hesitated. "I've never seen anyone walk into something that terrifying and make it look like love." He looked at her, glassy-eyed but sure. "I'm not good at this, starting over, knowing what's right. But what you did, for her, for me, I can't ignore that." She blinked, stunned. "I gave you that dress," he said gently, "not because I wanted to relive anything, but because you deserved something beautiful, and I needed a way to ask you to stay." Her throat tightened. He reached out, took her free hand. "You didn't wear that dress to replace anyone. You wore it because you're the first person who sees us, both of us, and stays." Her tears weren't about shame anymore. They were about being seen, fully. When nurses came to transfer Sophie back to bed, Maya and Adam stayed behind in the quiet waiting room, the hum of the vending machine the only sound. Maya turned toward him. "I've never told anyone this." He nodded, still holding her hand. 5 years ago, I was watching my nephew. He fell, just a short fall, but hit his head. I panicked and called my sister. She rushed to come home and was in a car accident. She didn't survive." His expression didn't change, but his grip tightened. "I've carried it ever since," Maya said. "I wasn't careful. I killed her." "No," Adam said firmly. She swallowed. "I don't let people close. I think if I do, I'll lose them. Or worse, hurt them." He sat with that for a moment. Then quietly, "We don't get to choose how our past ends." She looked up. "But we do get to choose how the next part begins." She tried to speak, but no words came, just a shaky breath. He leaned closer, rested his forehead gently against hers. "I want my next part to begin with you." And as fireworks cracked far beyond the hospital walls, Maya didn't run. She didn't doubt. She let herself be held. The smell of old paper and fresh paint filled the back corner of Reyes & Co.'s bookstore. It had once been a forgotten space, used for storage, stacked with unopened boxes and worn-out displays. But now, sunlight pooled on the freshly laid rugs, illuminating a low shelf filled with books wrapped in soft covers, stuffed animals perched beside reading pillows. In the center, a sign carved by hand in warm wood letters read, "The Sunshine Room." It was Maya's idea, but it was Adam's heart that brought it to life. After New Year's, after that long night in the hospital, something in both of them had shifted. There were no grand declarations, no promises too big to hold, just quiet understanding. Adam stopped pretending he didn't watch her walk into the pediatric wing each morning. Maya stopped pretending she didn't wait for Sophie's giggle echoing down the hallway. So when Adam asked, weeks later, if she might help him build a space for children recovering from long hospital stays, a space of calm, of color, of story, she said yes without hesitation. "I want it to feel safe," he had said, "like a place where someone could find a little bit of magic, even if they're still scared." Maya smiled and wrote down the first word that came to mind: sunshine. They worked side by side. Maya picked books about kindness and quiet courage, stories that didn't shy away from fear but always ended in light. Adam arranged shelves low enough for tiny hands to reach. When they disagreed, they laughed. When they agreed, they built. The room opened on a quiet Thursday afternoon. No ribbon cutting, no press release. Just Maya standing in the doorway, watching Sophie toddle into the center of the room with wide eyes. The little girl ran her hand across a soft armchair and pointed to a book with a yellow cover. Maya knelt beside her. "Do you want me to read this one?" Sophie nodded, and then, without warning, without coaxing, she spoke. "Sunshine," she whispered. Adam froze in the doorway. He looked at Maya. She was crying. Sophie said it again, this time more clearly, pointing up at the carved sign. "Sunshine." It was her first word in months. Adam slowly walked in and sat behind them, close enough to touch, but he didn't. He just watched. Maya opened the book and began to read, her voice steady and soft. It was a story about a girl who planted a garden in the middle of a storm, about how something beautiful could still grow, even when the world didn't feel safe. Sophie leaned her head against Maya's shoulder. Adam closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in. This was not a grand finale. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The hospital still called. Sophie still had checkups. Maya still had night shifts. Life was not magically fixed. But there, in that small corner of a quiet bookstore, surrounded by stories, something had begun to heal. 2 hearts, 1 room, and the softest word in the world, spoken by a girl who had once forgotten how, echoed into the shelves. Sunshine. The table was small, tucked by the window of a quiet bistro that smelled faintly of rosemary and fresh bread. The lights were low, the music soft and almost forgettable, just enough to fill the silences without interrupting them. Maya sat across from Adam, her hands resting around a warm ceramic cup. She wore no makeup, no heels, just a pale blue sweater and the same quiet smile that had once stopped a child's tears with nothing but a song. Adam wore a collared shirt, slightly wrinkled, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He looked at ease, but Maya noticed the way his foot tapped softly under the table. Nervous, a little unsure. She liked that he was still capable of being unsure. The waiter brought their food, pasta, simple, comforting, and left them in peace. "So," Adam said after a few bites, "this isn't a gala." "No ballroom," Maya replied, a small grin tugging at her lips. "No borrowed dresses." He shook his head. "And no ghosts tonight." She looked down for a second, her expression unreadable. Then she met his eyes. "Good," she said softly. "I'm tired of living in borrowed shadows." Adam reached across the table, palm up. She placed her hand in his, without hesitation. They stayed like that, fingers laced gently, neither rushing the moment. "It took me too long to ask you out," he said. "I kept thinking I had to wait for the right time, or the right reason." Maya tilted her head slightly. "And now?" "Now," he took a deep breath and smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that reaches the eyes, that crinkles the edges. "Now I know I don't need a reason." He let the words settle between them, then added, more quietly, "This time, it's not about healing anyone. It's not about Sophie, or guilt, or second chances. This time, it's just about sitting across from someone who makes me want to live one more day." Maya blinked. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She didn't look away. "You make me feel like I can stay," she whispered. He stood slowly, walked around the table and extended a hand, this time not as a gesture of comfort or protection, but something lighter, a beginning. Maya stood too. She looked up at him, eyes warm, heart open. Their kiss was unhurried. No promises, no plans. Just two people who had walked through silence, sorrow, storms, and found each other on the other side. Outside, the night was still. The world kept turning. But in that small bistro under soft lights, a first date became something more. And this time, neither of them was alone. Thank you for joining us on the journey of A Room with Two Hearts, a story not just about love, but about healing, forgiveness, and two souls learning how to begin again. If Maya, Adam, and little Sophie touched something in your heart today, we would be honored if you helped us share this feeling with more people. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next soul-stirring story, and if this one moved you, hit that hype button to let us know. We are soul-stirring stories where the quietest moments can carry the loudest meaning. See you in the next story.
The paralyzed little girl burst into tears, her trembling arms clutching her notebook tightly as she pleaded in despair. "Mom, please, don't tear my school books." But her cold-hearted stepmother yanked it away, ripping each page to shreds with merciless hands. And at that very moment, the door swung open, and the millionaire returned, witnessing everything. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell me which city you are watching from. Let's follow together these heartwarming stories, these touching stories that I want to share with you. Now, let's begin the story. The room on the second floor of the Montoya mansion was so silent you could hear the ticking of the clock with every passing second. On the transparent glass window that looked out onto the rose garden under the streetlights, rows of mathematical formulas stretched on, written in blue ink. Each symbol and number appeared like a secret language, tangled yet beautiful, reflecting the tender but intensely focused face of a 7-year-old girl. Isabella Montoya set her pen down, tilting her head slightly, her lips whispering. "If we switch this variable, see, Mom, it forms a new pattern, no longer stuck." The words slipped out softly, as if she were speaking to someone who was always watching over her. Her mother, whom she had lost when she was far too young to fully grasp the meaning of loss, yet old enough to feel the emptiness. That woman had passed away after years of fighting a cruel heart condition, leaving Isabella not only with a vast void but also with a journal filled with gentle lines of handwriting, as if trying to shelter her daughter, even when she could no longer be there. Her legs lay motionless under the thin blanket draped across her silver wheelchair. That small figure made the spacious room feel suddenly hollow. Isabella's world was confined to notebooks, formulas, and those whispered conversations with the shadow of her late mother. The door creaked open, a sliver of hallway light spilling inside. Teresa walked in, carefully balancing a tray of steaming food in her hands. A woman in her 60s, her silver hair neatly tied back, her posture slightly stooped after decades of work. Teresa had been with the Montoya family long before Isabella was born. She was part housekeeper, part grandmotherly figure whom the child leaned on. She placed the tray on the small wooden table beside the bed. The aroma of hot chicken soup filled the room, but Isabella's eyes remained fixed on the glass. "You forgot to eat again, little one," Teresa said, her voice carrying a touch of reproach but more worry than anything else. Startled, Isabella turned her head. Her clear blue eyes flickered with unease. "I didn't forget. I just wanted to solve this proof before it disappears from my head. If I stop now, tomorrow, I might not remember how I thought of it." Teresa gazed at the dense symbols written across the glass, then sighed softly. I know you're smart, Isabella, but even the sharpest mind needs a strong body to support it. Eat a little, then you can keep writing. Don't punish yourself with these numbers. The girl lowered her head, her tiny hand brushing the edge of the notebook resting on her lap, though her eyes still drifted back toward the window where the equations lingered. Teresa didn't press further. She pulled up a chair and sat beside her, her eyes filled with quiet sorrow as she watched that fragile back. The sudden ring of the telephone shattered the stillness. Isabella grabbed it quickly from the desk, her eyes lighting up. The screen displayed the familiar name, Dad. A smile bloomed on her face, the very smile she had waited for all day. Daddy, Isabella's voice trembled, like a beam of light cutting through the darkness. On the other end came a deep, warm yet weary male voice. I'm in the middle of a meeting, just calling to make sure you've had dinner. Listen to Teresa, then get some sleep, all right? A long silence stretched on. Isabella bit her lip, clutching the phone tightly. Hundreds of things pressed against her heart about the new math problem, about the diary her mother had left behind, about how much she missed her father, but her throat closed up. Yes, I understand. The brief call ended. The screen went dark, leaving behind only a cold stillness. Isabella set the phone down on the table, her eyes clouded with sorrow. Her small hand gripped the edge of her notebook. Teresa watched quietly, her heart tightening. After so many years of witnessing the distance between father and daughter Montoya, she understood this silent pain better than anyone. From the hallway outside, the sharp sound of high heels suddenly echoed, each heavy step striking the polished wooden floor. Every sound reverberated through the space like the beat of a song foreshadowing unease. Isabella looked up, her heart pounding. Teresa frowned and stood, but before she could reach the door, it swung open. Valeria appeared. The young woman's golden hair flowed loosely over her shoulders, and the red dress hugging her figure made her proud stance all the more striking. Her lips, painted with bold lipstick, curved into a faint smile. Yet her cold gaze swept across the room, lingering on the glass panel filled with numbers, then slid down to Isabella's face as she sat in her wheelchair. Valeria gave a soft, derisive laugh, her voice sweet but laced with contempt. This won't do you any good. Isabella froze, clutching the notebook against her chest, her lips trembling. The numbers on the glass, moments ago glowing with passion, suddenly blurred through her tear-filled eyes. Teresa's eyes flickered with outrage, but she held it back, choosing instead to step quietly closer to Isabella and place a hand on the girl's shoulder. The air in the room grew heavy, as though the numbers on the glass had just been swallowed by darkness, foretelling a storm about to break over their lives. Teresa took a step forward, her instincts as the woman who had cared for Isabella since birth, urging her to shield the girl from Valeria's cruel gaze. Ma'am, it's late. The child needs to rest. If you wish to say something, please wait until tomorrow morning. Valeria froze for half a second, then a mocking smile spread across her face. Her blonde hair, falling loosely over her shoulders, swayed as she tilted her head. Rest? This girl sits in one place all day. What does she have to be tired about? Or are you just pitying her too much? Teresa did not respond. She simply placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder, gently squeezing, as if to offer comfort. The girl clutched her notebook tightly, her eyes filled with both fear and confusion. Valeria stepped closer, her high heels clicking sharply against the floor. Listen to me, Teresa. I don't need you interfering with how I discipline this girl. If you open your mouth one more time, you can pack your bags tonight. Go back outside and finish your work. Move. The threat was cold as ice. Teresa pressed her lips tightly together. She bent down and whispered softly in Isabella's ear, "Be careful, my dear." Then she turned and walked out, the door closing behind her, leaving the room swallowed in suffocating tension. The air grew heavy. Isabella clutched her notebook harder, her small hands trembling. Her blue eyes brimmed with tears as she looked up at Valeria. "Please, Mom," she whispered, her voice as fragile as a thread. "Don't touch my notebook." Valeria let out a sharp laugh. "Do you think you're smart? You're just a crippled little girl trying to put on a show. Do these numbers make you walk? Do they make you like the other children? "You useless cripple." "I only want to study," Isabella answered, her voice shaking. "That's all I have." "Shut up," Valeria snapped, her words cracking like a whip. She lunged forward and tore the notebook from Isabella's hands. "No, give it back," Isabella cried, her tiny arms trying desperately to hold on, but it was useless. Valeria yanked hard, the pages ripping apart. The tearing sound was sharp, slicing straight into Isabella's heart. She watched in horror as the torn sheets fluttered down onto the wooden floor, her wide eyes frozen in disbelief. "No, please, don't!" The heart-wrenching cry echoed through the room. Isabella lunged forward on reflex. Her wheelchair tipped and crashed to the side. Her small body hit the floor, her knees striking with a harsh thud. But she didn't cry out in pain. She didn't care. Her trembling hands scrambled to gather the torn pieces of paper, pressing them tightly against her chest as if she were clutching the last fragment of her soul. Valeria stood there, her breath ragged with rage, though her eyes gleamed with a cruel delight. "Pathetic. You're just like your mother, all tears, clinging to worthless things." Isabella lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice breaking yet fierce. "Don't you ever talk about my mother like that. My mother was not worthless." The words burst out between sobs but carried a strength that made Valeria freeze for a moment. Then fury surged again, pushing her to search for something that could wound Isabella even more. Her gaze fell on the pillow at the head of the bed. Sticking out from beneath its edge was a worn little brown notebook. Valeria bent down, snatched it up, and flipped through a few pages, her eyes lit with mockery. "Well, what's this? An old diary? From the dead, perhaps?" Panic shot through Isabella. She pushed herself up with her scraped knees and stumbled toward Valeria. "Please, Mother, don't take that. It was my mother's. It's all I have left." Valeria skimmed a few lines of the careful handwriting and smirked. "Sentimental words, meaningless. Why would you keep this?" Isabella's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't tear it. You can hit me, scold me, rip my homework, but don't tear the diary. It's what my mother left behind. I'm begging you." She collapsed to her knees, arms raised as if praying for a miracle. Her whole body trembled. Her voice faltered. "Please, don't take away the only thing I have." Valeria looked down, her cold smile widening. "The only thing left? That makes me want to rip it apart right now." Her fingers gripped the edge of a page, pulling sharply, ready to tear. Isabella let out a desperate scream, hurling herself forward to clutch at the hem of Valeria's red dress, her tiny hands squeezing tight in despair. At that very instant, the heavy doors burst open. A gust of wind swept in, carrying the thunderous voice of a man filled with fury. "Enough, Valeria." The entire room trembled. Valeria froze, her hands suspended midair. Isabella whipped her head around, her tearful eyes wide with shock. In the doorway stood Alejandro Montoya, his face hardened, his eyes blazing with fire. For a heartbeat, the air turned to stone. Time itself seemed to halt. And in that moment, everything that had been suppressed for so long finally reached its breaking point. The door burst open, a cold gust swept inside, and the torn scraps of paper scattered across the floor flew up into the air. The sound of rustling echoed through the silent room. Isabella lifted her head, her tear-filled eyes wide, while Valeria froze, her hand clutching the diary suspended midair. Alejandro Montoya stood at the threshold, his tall frame casting a shadow across the floor. He was still wearing the gray suit from the evening meeting, his tie loosened, his face marked with weary lines. Yet, in that instant, the exhaustion vanished, replaced by an explosion of fury, his eyes blazing like a fire unleashed. Alejandro was a millionaire in the field of AI technology, a pioneer behind projects that stunned the industry. For years, his name had been tied to groundbreaking products and global partnerships. People called him a cold, calculating mind, fearless yet distant. Since the day his wife died of heart disease, Alejandro had poured himself into his work, leaving a void at home that only grew deeper. Isabella, his paralyzed daughter blessed with extraordinary intelligence, was the most precious treasure he had left, but also the wound he rarely dared to face. He loved her, yet being consumed by his career, he convinced himself that wealth and the care of others could replace his presence. That was why he rushed into marrying Valeria, believing she could provide Isabella the affection he himself had no time to give. Tonight, Alejandro had been scheduled for an important meeting at a hotel with a major partner. When the partner unexpectedly canceled, he intended to stay and rest. But after calling Isabella and hearing her trembling voice on the other end, a sharp pain pierced his chest. His instincts screamed, urging him to return home immediately, without warning. That very decision had led him here, to witness the raw truth he had once been blind enough to ignore. He saw his daughter kneeling on the floor, her small body trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around the torn pieces of paper, her face drenched in tears. In front of her stood Valeria, the wife he had trusted, holding the old diary in her hands. The sight struck Alejandro like a blow, his shock hardening into searing rage. His voice thundered through the room, heavy as rolling thunder. "If you dare touch her again, I will never forgive you." Valeria flinched, her trembling hands letting the diary fall to the floor. Her once golden flowing hair was now in disarray, her wide eyes frozen in fear. When did you come back?" she stammered, then quickly dropped to her knees, trying to cover her panic with hurried tears. "You've misunderstood," Valeria sobbed, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. "I only wanted to discipline her. She was disrespectful to me first. I never meant to hurt her. I only wanted her to learn obedience." Alejandro strode forward, picked up the diary, and gently placed it back into Isabella's lap. Kneeling beside his daughter, his hand shook as he brushed her tangled hair. His heart clenched when he saw the bruises on her small knees. Valeria kept pleading, "Alejandro, you have to believe me. I only want what's best for her. You can't let a stubborn child get everything she wants. She needs a strict mother figure." Alejandro spun around, his eyes sharp as blades. From his briefcase, he pulled out a stack of papers and flung them to the ground. The cold slap of paper against the floor echoed through the room. "Enough. I've been blind for too long." Valeria's gaze dropped, horrified when she realized it was divorce papers. No, this can't be." Isabella still trembled, clutching the diary tightly. Her tear-stained eyes turned to her father, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Daddy, you won't leave me, will you?" Alejandro pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her as if he might lose her again. Pressing his forehead to her hair, his voice cracked. "No, I will never leave you. I'm sorry, Isabella. I was wrong to let you suffer alone." Isabella sobbed, her small shoulders trembling. For the first time in years, she felt her father's embrace truly holding her, a place of safety she could finally lean on. But Valeria refused to give up. Crawling closer, her face streaked with tears, her voice broke. "Alejandro, please listen to me. I love you. I love this family. I can change. We can start over. Please, don't do this." Alejandro placed Isabella back into her wheelchair. Rising tall, his voice rang firm. "I made a mistake bringing you into this home. That mistake ends today. Pack your things and get out of my house." Hearing the commotion, Rosa, the longtime cook, and Jorge, the family's driver, rushed in. They froze at the scene before them. Alejandro didn't hesitate, his command sharp and final. "Take her out." Rosa and Jorge exchanged a look, then stepped forward. Whatever respect they once had for the young mistress was gone. Valeria struggled, screaming, "Don't throw me out. Alejandro, you'll regret this. You owe me. You can't abandon me like this." Her shrieks echoed through the hallway as they dragged her toward the grand staircase. Her high heels clattered against the marble, her red dress sweeping across the cold stone floor. Isabella gripped her father's hand, her eyes still wet. She whispered, "Daddy, I'm scared." Alejandro bent down, tightening his hold on her small hand. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm here now." The heavy front doors closed with a final thud, yet Valeria still thrashed, her eyes flashing with hatred. Her voice rose, venomous. "You'll both regret this. I swear it." The door slammed shut, its echo as heavy as a curse. The vast house fell silent. In that silence remained only Alejandro's ragged breathing and Isabella's trembling heartbeat, father and daughter clinging to each other amid the pain and the truth that had finally come to light. That night, after being dragged out of the mansion, Valeria sat alone in a mid-range hotel room in the center of the city. Her red dress was wrinkled, her makeup smeared by tears and rage. She stared at the large mirror hanging on the wall. In the reflection, she no longer saw the confident, alluring woman from the gala, but a pitiful figure cast out of the house of power. Valeria bit her lip until blood appeared. She whispered to herself, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. No one has the right to humiliate me like that. Alejandro, you will pay. And that girl, she won't find peace either. All night, Valeria could not close her eyes. The yellow light in the room cast her staggering shadow, her mind boiling with dark thoughts. But Valeria knew that to bring down a man like Alejandro Montoya, she could not act alone. The following evening, the city lit up. Valeria wore a long black coat that hid her usually golden hair, her makeup heavier than usual to conceal her fatigue. The taxi carried her to a luxurious bar on the top floor of a 5-star hotel. Inside, the lights were dim, soft jazz floated in the air, and the strong scent of liquor lingered everywhere. At a VIP table by the window, a man was already waiting. It was Victor Delgado, Alejandro's greatest rival in the tech industry. Delgado, in his early 40s, had neatly combed black hair and eyes as sharp as blades. His tailored black suit fit snugly, his shirt collar open at 2 buttons, a gold ring gleaming on his finger. He was notorious not only for his business skills but also for his ruthlessness, ready to crush any opponent by any means. Valeria walked toward him, her heels striking the floor with a cold rhythm. She sat down across from him, her bloodshot eyes revealing sleepless nights. "You want to bring Alejandro down, don't you?" Valeria's voice was hoarse, but her gaze burned with hatred. Victor lifted his glass of red wine, swirled it gently, and smirked. "That question is unnecessary. I've wanted to see him fall for a long time. The real issue is, what exactly are you offering me?" Valeria leaned her elbow on the table, her red nails scraping lightly against the wood. "I'll help you. I know what goes on inside his house. I know his weaknesses. But I don't work for free. What I want is for him and that daughter of his to be utterly destroyed. I want them to lose everything." Victor chuckled softly, a laugh laced with both surprise and amusement. "You hate them that much?" "Yes," Valeria spat out each word. "Alejandro humiliated me. And that little girl, she is the thorn that keeps me from ever owning his whole heart. Without her, I would already be the mistress of everything." Victor set his glass down on the table, his eyes sharp as steel. "Fine. But to bring down a man like Alejandro, we can't just throw a few bitter words. We need a detonator, something that will turn public opinion against him." Valeria leaned in, her voice dropping. "What's your plan?" Victor answered slowly, his tone low and predatory, like a hunter who had just spotted a rich prey. "I know someone. She's a reporter, but she feeds on sensational headlines. Her name is Camila Torres. She'll do anything to get attention. As long as there's a tragic enough story, Camila will turn it into a media storm." Valeria curled her lips into a mocking smile. "Perfect. I'll give her the details the public craves. Alejandro is the cold-hearted man, his disabled daughter abandoned. Imagine who would take his side after reading that." Victor raised his glass, a glint flashing in his eyes. "An irresistible deal. If you want to destroy him, from now on we're in the same boat." The 2 glasses clinked together, the crystalline sound echoing in the dim light, as if a pact had just been sealed with wine and hatred. While Valeria and Victor sealed their alliance in the shadows, at the Montoya estate, Isabella still could not escape the nightmare of the previous night. The little girl sat on her bed, clutching her worn diary tightly against her chest. Her face was still marked with red swellings from crying too much. Teresa sat beside her, carefully dressing the scrapes on her tiny knees. Isabella's voice was hoarse from exhaustion. I begged her, but she still wanted to tear everything I had. "I'm afraid I won't be able to keep anything that belonged to my mom." Teresa stopped, pulling the child into a firm embrace. "Listen to me, Isabella. You are no longer alone. You have me. You have your father. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Isabella rubbed her eyes, looking at Teresa with confusion. "But if Dad goes away on business again, if I'm left alone, What am I supposed to do? Teresa stroked her hair, her voice firm. Your father saw everything. He will not turn his back again. Trust me. The door opened slightly. Alejandro stood outside, his hand gripping the frame. He remained silent, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. He had heard every word his daughter said, and it felt as though someone was crushing his heart in their fist. Never had he felt so ashamed of himself. A man who had everything, yet left his little girl trembling in fear. He quietly turned away, not entering, only whispering to himself, "This time, I will not leave her alone again." The next morning, the city awoke to a new day. But for Alejandro and Isabella, a new storm had begun. On the newsstands, the tabloids were laid out in stacks. On the front page, a bold, glaring headline screamed, "Millionaire Alejandro Montoya abandons disabled daughter." Beneath it was a photograph of Isabella sitting alone in her wheelchair, her face sorrowful, clearly snapped from afar without her knowing. The article was long, filled with fabrications, accusing Alejandro of being a cruel father, selfish, obsessed only with work and money. The story had escaped the four walls of the mansion, turning into a raging wave that engulfed both father and daughter, dragging them into the vicious whirlpool of public opinion. The next morning, as sunlight spread across the rows of houses, the air was unsettled by the tabloids scattered on newsstands along the sidewalks. A glaring headline screamed in bold letters, "Millionaire Alejandro Montoya abandons his disabled daughter." The words spread like wildfire. Adults gossiped on street corners, taxi drivers read snippets aloud to their passengers, and groups of vendors shook their heads in dismay. Isabella did not see any of it with her own eyes, but she could feel it. When the school bus stopped in front of the mansion gate, Jorge, the loyal old driver, bent down to lift her up. His face was solemn, and Isabella sensed the day ahead would be anything but peaceful. "Little one, be strong," Jorge whispered as he adjusted her seatbelt. "People can say whatever they want, but only you know the truth." Isabella gave a faint nod, hugging her notebook tightly to her chest. The bus rolled away, carrying her to school, as it always did. Yet inside her heart, a heavy emptiness grew. When the bus finally stopped, Isabella took a deep breath, telling herself to stay calm. But the moment the wheels touched the schoolyard, she knew this day would be different. Dozens of eyes fixed on her, some curious, some pitying, and more than a few filled with scorn. "There, that's her. I saw it. The paper showed her sitting in a wheelchair. Pitiful, isn't it? Her father's so rich, yet he doesn't even care." The whispers pierced Isabella's ears, sharp as needles. She lowered her head, her small hands trembling as they gripped the notebook. Her heart raced, her throat tightened. She wanted to shout that it was all lies, that her father had returned to her side, but the words were trapped inside her chest. In the classroom, the atmosphere was even heavier. When Isabella wheeled herself in, the room went silent. A few chairs scraped across the floor, some eyes turned away, but many others stayed fixed on her, unable to hide their judgment. A whisper rose from the back row. "Maybe her dad's too ashamed to ever show his face." Another voice added, "And she's always bragging about how smart she island. Doesn't matter how smart, she's still useless." Isabella bit her lip, forcing her tears back. She set her notebook on the desk as though it were the last wall protecting her. The classroom door swung open. Strong footsteps echoed against the tile. Mr. Hector Ramirez walked in. He was past 50, tall and lean, his salt and pepper hair combed back, his deep-set eyes cold and unforgiving. Hector was known throughout the school as a strict man, so severe that many students feared him. To him, discipline was absolute, and in his mind, there was no place for weakness or difference. Placing his briefcase on the desk, Hector's eyes swept across the room. When his gaze landed on Isabella, the corner of his mouth curled into a faint, mocking smile. Folding his arms, he spoke in a steady voice, each word carrying a sharp edge of disdain. "You all must have read the newspaper this morning. They never lie. What can a disabled child do except bring shame to her family?" The room seemed to freeze. A few students looked at each other, some snickered, while others lowered their heads in embarrassment. Isabella sat motionless. Her small hands trembled beneath the desk, fingernails digging into the edge of her notebook. She wanted to protest, to say she was not useless, but fear tightened her throat. A small sound broke the silence. Isabella's pen slipped from her hand, rolling across the floor until it stopped at the leg of the desk beside her. A quick hand reached down and picked it up. It was Mateo Rivera, a 10-year-old boy with messy black hair and bright brown eyes. His family was ordinary, his father an office clerk and his mother a seamstress, but Mateo was well known in class for his honesty and rare kindness. He placed the pen gently back on Isabella's desk and whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "Don't listen to them. I believe in you." Isabella lifted her head, her eyes shimmering with emotion. A small, trembling yet genuine smile spread across her lips. In that instant, the bleak world around her seemed to spark with a faint light. Hector tapped his ruler sharply against the chalkboard, cutting through the moment. He began to write out a long equation, the numbers twisting like a maze. When he finished, he turned back, fixing his gaze directly on Isabella, his tone drawn out and mocking. "Can anyone in this class solve this problem? Or should we wait until the genius in the wheelchair gives it a try?" Laughter erupted from several corners of the classroom. The air filled with ridicule, a heavy wave of derision. Isabella gripped her pen tightly, her heart pounding. She raised her head, eyes blazing, and her voice rang out with steady determination, clear enough to bring the entire class to silence. "You'll see, sir." Isabella's firm words silenced the entire classroom. No one dared laugh out loud anymore, but in many students' eyes, doubt lingered, mixed with a spark of curious excitement. Hector Ramirez narrowed his eyes slightly. He tapped the piece of chalk against the desk, then began writing more complex formulas on the board, deliberately stretching out an already difficult math problem. That was his usual tactic, making things harder so that any student bold enough to challenge him would end up exposing their helplessness. When he finished writing, Hector put the chalk down and crossed his arms over his chest. His voice was dry and bitter. "Fine. If you are so confident, show the entire class. Let's see what the so-called wheelchair geniuses can really do besides talking tough." A few chuckles echoed from the back of the room, but they quickly died down under the weight of the others' curious stares. Isabella bit her lip, her small hands trembling, but her eyes shone brightly. She raised her hand and spoke softly. "Sir, may I solve it?" Hector lifted his chin, his tone heavy. "Go ahead. Just don't complain if you end up humiliating yourself." Mateo, sitting at the next desk, leaned forward and whispered, "You can do it. I believe in you." Isabella gripped the side of her wheelchair and began pushing the wheels forward. The creaking sound echoed through the classroom, stretching the tension even further. Every inch toward the board was a challenge. When she finally reached it, Isabella raised her hand, her fingers trembling as they grasped the piece of white chalk. The entire class held its breath. She wrote the first lines, slow but steady. "First, I will move this variable to the other side to balance the equation." Her voice rang out, clear and even. At first, a few students looked uninterested, but after only a few lines, their expressions began to change. Isabella's steps of reasoning were different, breaking away from the usual path, opening a creative and unexpected direction. She wasn't just solving the problem. She was turning it into a clear, logical journey where every step made sense. Hector furrowed his brow and moved closer to the board. He followed each symbol carefully, searching for a flaw. But the more he looked, the more undeniable the logic appeared in her work. A student in the front row whispered, "I never thought of solving it that way." The one sitting next to him nodded, eyes widening. "It's really smart, not like any method we've learned." Mateo clenched his fists, almost ready to shout with pride. Isabella kept writing, sweat beading on her forehead, but her voice was steady. When she reached the final step, she turned back to the class and said softly, "This is the final result. That's all I have." The classroom fell silent for a few seconds, then suddenly erupted in applause. Mateo was the first to clap, then others joined in, the sound spreading across the room. The heavy air that had hung over them shattered, replaced by surprise and admiration. Isabella sat back down, her heart still pounding. She looked around and noticed a few classmates smiling at her instead of mocking her. Her eyes welled up, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from a fragile sense of pride she had just reclaimed. Hector Ramirez stood frozen. He bit his lip, his hands tightening behind his back. On his stern face flickered a trace of unease. He wanted to object, to point out a flaw, but he couldn't. Isabella's solution was too clear, too logical. Just as it seemed the mood of the room was shifting toward Isabella, a familiar sound rang out. The ping of an incoming message from a student's phone, then another. And soon a chorus of alerts buzzed through the classroom. One quick-handed boy unlocked his phone, his eyes widening as he read aloud. Breaking news: Alejandro Montoya, founder of Montoya AI, is under investigation for neglecting his disabled daughter. The words exploded in the room like a bomb. The class broke into a storm of whispers. Is that true? Her dad's really like that? No wonder the news said it. People in AI live with machines and forget their own kids. Poor girl, but it's scary too. If her dad's really under investigation, then... Isabella froze in place. The pride that had just begun to bloom inside her was drowned under a fresh wave of rumor. Her small hands gripped the pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. Matteo turned to her, his eyes burning with anger. Don't listen to them. You know the truth. Isabella bit her lip, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wanted to believe Matteo's words, but the storm outside was too fierce. Once again, all eyes seemed to fall on her, not with admiration now, but with doubt, even pity. At the back of the room, Hector allowed himself a faint smirk, his eyes glinting with a strange satisfaction. He said nothing, but his silence weighed heavier than any insult. Isabella sat still, her heart struggling against the weight. She knew the road to proving her worth would be long and full of obstacles. Yet in her bright eyes, that tiny flame refused to die. Night fell over the Montoya mansion with an unusual stillness. The wind swept through the trees in the garden, carrying a chilling undertone. Alejandro sat alone in his study, a room long filled with reports, contracts, and computer screens flashing complex AI models. But tonight, all of that was left untouched. In front of him lay an old journal. The leather cover was worn, and many pages had been torn apart in Valeria's fits of anger. Alejandro had spent hours patiently piecing the fragments back together, his hands once steady in signing million-dollar contracts now trembling as they touched the delicate handwriting of his wife. He turned a page, his eyes pausing on a passage written in purple ink, the script soft and graceful. Never let our daughter feel like she's alone. Alejandro's breath caught. He pressed his hand over the words, his vision blurring. Memories flooded back. The day Isabella was born, that tiny hand gripping his finger. The day his wife lay in a hospital bed, her weak smile entrusting him with their daughter's future. And yet he had done the opposite. He had let his work, the AI laboratories, the outside world steal him away from his child's life. Alejandro closed the journal and lowered his forehead onto the desk. His voice came out hoarse, like a confession. I was wrong. Isabella, your father was wrong. The desk lamp cast its glow over his weary face, exposing the rare vulnerability of a man who was always seen as unbreakable. The next morning, Alejandro did not go to the company. For the first time in years, he canceled every meeting. Instead of sitting inside Montoya AI's laboratory with rows of servers glowing, he went to the rehabilitation center where Isabella was undergoing therapy for her legs. The room was bright, its walls painted a gentle shade of blue with pictures of flowers hanging to create a sense of calm. In the corner, physical therapy equipment was neatly lined up. Isabella sat in her wheelchair, her hands gripping the armrests tightly, her face showing a flicker of tension. Beside her was Dr. Lucia Herrera, about 35 years old, her brown hair tied high, her voice deep and warm. She was known for her dedication, for helping countless disabled children rediscover hope with her endless patience. We'll try lifting your leg once more, Isabella, Lucia said, her eyes encouraging. Isabella gave a small nod, but as soon as she raised her head, she froze. Alejandro was standing at the door, no longer in his fine suit, but in a simple white shirt with sleeves rolled up. No phone, no laptop, only the eyes of a father fixed on his daughter. Dad. Isabella's voice trembled. What are you doing here? Alejandro moved closer, kneeling down to his daughter's level. He took her tiny hands in his own, his breath catching in his throat. Daddy came to practice with you. I've left you alone for far too long. From now on, things will be different, Isabella. The little girl's eyes widened, filled with tears. "You've never come to me like this before." Alejandro squeezed her hands firmly, his voice steady. "I promise, I won't abandon you again. For all the days I've missed, I will make it up with every day that's left." Lucia, who had been watching, smiled softly. She placed her hand on Alejandro's shoulder. "If that's the case, Mr. Montoya, stand behind your daughter. Today, you'll be her support." The session began. Lucia instructed, "Isabella, try to lift your right leg slowly. Mr. Montoya, hold her back so she doesn't lose her balance." Alejandro wrapped his arms gently around the small frame. Isabella bit her lip, her forehead tightening with pain. He leaned close, whispering, "Come on, I'm right here. Just a little bit is enough." Her stiff legs trembled, then shifted a few centimeters. Isabella gasped for breath, sweat breaking across her skin. But when she looked up and saw her father's hand gripping hers, courage surged again. "Very good," Lucia encouraged. "Now lean to the left, your father will hold you." Isabella followed, nearly falling, but Alejandro caught her in time. He pressed his cheek against her sweat-damp hair, whispering, "I won't let you fall." The practice lasted almost an hour. Isabella was exhausted, but her eyes shone brighter than ever. Resting against her father's chest, she panted heavily, yet her smile remained. "I never thought you would be here, with me, like today." Alejandro held her tightly, his eyes red with emotion. "I'm sorry, but from now on, I will never leave you again." Lucia watched, deeply moved. She had seen many busy parents, but rarely anyone willing to humble themselves and start over. Perhaps it was that diary that had opened a new path for Alejandro. As father and daughter held hands, the television in the room clicked on by its timer. A news anchor appeared, voice clear and firm. "Breaking news. Montoya Group, the leading AI corporation founded by millionaire Alejandro Montoya, is facing the risk of bankruptcy. A series of lawsuits and accusations of neglecting social responsibility have caused its stock price to plummet without control." Isabella stared at the screen, stunned, her eyes wide. "Daddy, are they talking about your company?" Alejandro tightened his grip on his daughter's hand, his face darkening. The promises he had just spoken still echoed in the room. Yet a new storm had arrived, fiercer than ever. News of Montoya Group's possible bankruptcy hung over the mansion like a dark cloud. Alejandro had not slept all night. Yet when dawn came, he still decided to take Isabella to school. He knew that if he allowed rumors and public judgment to paralyze everything, he would once again be leaving his daughter to face the world alone, something he had just promised never to repeat. That day, the school held its annual writing contest with the theme, "The Home in My Heart." Although she had prepared beforehand, Isabella sat silently in the classroom, clutching her notebook tightly. She could hear whispers rippling around her. "Do you think she even dares to read? Her father is under investigation. Maybe she'll try to defend him? I heard she's good at math, but writing, not so much." Mateo leaned closer and whispered, "Ignore them. Write from your heart. That's all that matters." Isabella looked at him, her eyes bright, yet full of worry. She took a deep breath, then closed her notebook, ready. The auditorium was packed. Parents filled the rows below, teachers and judges occupied the rows above. Alejandro sat at the back of the room, apart from everyone else, as if trying to avoid their stares. He wore no suit, only a white shirt, looking simpler yet somehow more approachable. The announcer called each contestant. The other children read stories about colorful houses, memories with their grandparents, family dinners. The audience smiled and clapped politely. Then it was Isabella's turn. The room quieted for a brief moment. Some parents whispered. A few students exchanged looks. But Isabella calmly wheeled herself onto the stage. The creak of the wheels echoed, like a steady rhythm marking each step of her courage. Among the teachers' row, Elena Morales, Isabella's literature teacher, clenched her hands tightly, her eyes filled with both worry and hope. Elena, now in her 40s, was strict but deeply caring toward her students. From the very first day she had taken this class, she had noticed that Isabella's gaze was different, the gaze of a child who had seen too much loss, yet still longed to tell her story. Isabella stopped in the middle of the stage and unfolded the sheet of paper. Her voice was small, yet it carried clearly. My piece is titled, My Mother's House. A faint murmur rippled through the hall, then silence gradually settled in. In the little room, my mother used to read me stories. The yellow lamplight glowed against the walls, her voice warm like a lullaby. When she was gone, the room became empty, but I didn't want her voice to disappear. I began to write, to continue those stories. Isabella's voice caught for a moment, but she forced herself to keep the rhythm. My home is not only the walls and the roof. My home is memory. It is the place that holds my mother's laughter. It is the diary I hug tightly whenever I feel lost. And when my father holds my hand in the therapy room, I know that home is still partly alive. She paused, lowering her eyes. Alejandro sat at the back of the hall, his hands clenched so tight they had turned white. He did not blink, as if afraid to miss a single word. One day I hope my home will once again have laughter, and the pages will no longer be soaked with tears. Because I believe that home does not only belong to my mother, but also to me and my father. The hall was utterly still. A few parents' tears rolled down their cheeks. Mateo, sitting in the front row, eyes shimmering, squeezed Isabella's wrist as if to give her strength. Miss Elena suddenly stood up, unable to contain herself, walked onto the stage, and embraced Isabella. Her voice broke as she said, "You have shown us that a true home is built with love. Thank you." Applause erupted, at first scattered, then swelling into a wave. Some people stood and bowed in respect for the little girl's courage. Isabella bowed, a trembling smile on her lips. For the first time, she no longer felt like a pitied shadow, but someone who could reach another person's heart. Alejandro sat still, his eyes blurred with tears. He had never imagined his daughter carried within her such strength. What he could not achieve with money or technology, the little girl had accomplished with intelligence and love. While at school, Isabella's essay spread like a flame that lit up hearts. Elsewhere, darkness continued to feed hatred. In a sealed office, with only dim yellow light and thick smoke in the air, Victor Delgado slammed the newspaper onto the desk. The headline was bold, "Montoya Girl's Essay Stuns the Audience into Silence." Victor ground his teeth, his voice bitter and harsh. "If the public begins to pity her, then we have to finish this with a legal blow." His eyes gleamed, his fingers crushing the cigarette until it snapped. The darkness of the room grew dense, foretelling a storm that was about to break. The essay Mother's House after the competition did not remain confined within the school auditorium. One moved parent had recorded Isabella's reading and uploaded it to Facebook. Within just a few days, the video had been shared thousands of times, spreading even onto TikTok with comments overflowing with emotion. People spoke of little Montoya, not with pity, but with admiration. Yet at the same time, another counterattack was being prepared. Victor Delgado, after seeing public opinion gradually lean toward Isabella, pushed dissatisfied lawyers and shareholders to file a lawsuit against Alejandro. The accusations focused sharply on the image of a negligent father who abandoned his disabled daughter. The trial became a public event, drawing hundreds of reporters. That morning, the car carrying the Montoya father and daughter stopped in front of the central courthouse. A crowd of journalists pushed and jostled, camera flashes firing non-stop. Alejandro stepped out, dressed in a dark suit, yet his eyes remained calm. He looked down at Isabella, sitting in her wheelchair, then gently tightened his grip on her hand. "We will walk in together, my dear." Isabella gave a slight nod, her eyes shining with determination. Accompanying them was attorney Antonio Salgado, a man in his 50s, tall, with salt and pepper hair, known for his resolve in major lawsuits. He glanced around at the crowd, then spoke quietly. "Do not let those cameras distract us. We are here to tell the truth." The courtroom was vast, with high ceilings and cold white light. On the elevated bench, Judge Ramirez sat with solemn authority, his face stern. He was over 60, his hair completely white, and his sharp eyes swept across the room as if to pierce through each person present. The public seating was packed. Journalists lined both sides, ready to record every single word. The prosecutor began, his voice firm. "Your Honor, Alejandro Montoya, founder of Montoya AI, devoted all his time to the company, abandoning his disabled daughter. For years, the girl lived only with a nanny and stepmother. This is an unforgivable act of irresponsibility. Alejandro sat silently, his face calm though his hands clenched tightly together. Attorney Antonio rose, his gaze steady. We deny all of these claims, and to prove it, we will call a witness. The door opened. Doña Teresa entered, the elderly housekeeper, her silver hair tied neatly, her figure frail yet her eyes blazing. She placed her hand on the witness stand, her voice trembling but resolute. I did not see it directly, because at that moment I had been ordered outside. But I stood at the door and heard very clearly Isabella crying, begging. The girl said, "Please, Mom, don't tear up my school books." The sound of pages being ripped echoed again and again, and right after that I heard the crash of the wheelchair hitting the floor and the child's sobbing screams. I have kept silent for too long out of fear of losing my job, but today I cannot remain silent any longer. The entire courtroom buzzed. A few reporters typed frantically, recording every word. Next, Rosa, the cook, was called. She wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes resolute. I have seen Valeria throw food into the little girl's face many times, then laugh mockingly. I cannot forget the pitiful look in that child's eyes. Jorge, the driver, stepped forward too, his voice hoarse. I once heard screams coming from Isabella's room, followed by Valeria's curses. I could not keep calm anymore. What she did, she does not deserve to be called a mother. The prosecutor tried to object, but Attorney Antonio immediately produced documents. Evidence of money transfers from Victor Delgado to Camila Torres, a tabloid journalist. Camila was summoned. Under pressure, she trembled, then finally broke down in tears. Yes, I was paid to write those articles. I exaggerated the story about Mr. Montoya abandoning his daughter. I was wrong. I am sorry. The courtroom stirred. Many shook their heads. A few let out heavy sighs. Moments later, an audio recording was played. The voice of Hector Ramirez, the math teacher, filled the room. What can a disabled child ever do? She only brings shame to her father. Hector lowered his head, his hands trembling uncontrollably. The courtroom fell silent, then whispers of outrage rose everywhere. The atmosphere tilted completely in favor of the Montoya family. But just as everyone thought the trial was all but decided, Isabella suddenly raised her hand. Please, may I speak? The room went quiet. Alejandro turned, ready to stop her, but then he saw his daughter's eyes, the same determined look she had on the night she solved that math problem in front of the entire class. Sitting in her wheelchair, Isabella clutched her notebook tightly. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. I know many people pity me, but I do not need that pity. I only want to learn, to live like every other child. She took a deep breath, her eyes shining. Please do not use my legs to deny my mind. I cannot run, but I can write. I can solve math. I can dream, and I know my father has never abandoned me. At that moment, the courtroom was utterly silent. Then applause erupted, one person at a time. Mateo, sitting in the public gallery, was the first to clap. Then Rosa, then Jorge, and soon an entire row stood up. The sound of applause thundered, rolling on without end. Alejandro bowed his head, tears falling onto his clenched hands. For the first time, he no longer saw his daughter as just a child to be protected, but as a small yet unbreakable warrior. Judge Ramirez banged his gavel, his commanding voice filling the courtroom. Order! The court is adjourned. The verdict will be announced tomorrow. The gavel struck the wood like a tense bell suspended over everyone. That morning the city sky was clear and blue, but the atmosphere outside the central courthouse was unusually heavy. People had gathered since dawn, reporters pushed forward, and the constant flashes of cameras lit up the air. Everyone was waiting for a verdict that would finally close the long, tense days where honor and truth would be decided. Alejandro Montoya stepped out of the black car, dressed in a dark suit that did little to hide his exhaustion. Beside him, Isabella sat in her wheelchair, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes bright yet calm. He bent down, placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and whispered, "Today everything will come to an end, my girl." Isabella nodded softly. I trust you, Dad." Walking with them was attorney Antonio Salgado, a tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair and a stern expression. He cleared his throat lightly, scanned the crowd of reporters with sharp eyes, then spoke in a low tone. "Don't let them distract us. All we need is the truth." The three of them entered the courthouse. The noise outside slowly faded away, giving space to the tense air that filled the courtroom. In the large chamber, every gaze turned to the raised bench where Judge Ramirez sat today. He was a man in his 60s, with white hair and piercing eyes that seemed to uncover every hidden corner. At his side stood Chief Prosecutor Martinez, around 40 years old, known for his commanding voice and reputation as a sharp, relentless adversary. Valeria sat in the defendant's row. The elegant dresses she once flaunted had been replaced with a gray prison uniform, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with fear. Next to her, Victor Delgado tried to maintain a calm facade, his arms crossed, though the hand resting on his thigh trembled slightly. When the judge's gavel struck, the room fell into silence. Martinez rose, his voice ringing out across the chamber. "After reviewing all the evidence, witness testimony, and the results of the investigation, the court hereby delivers the following verdict." The air grew thick. Every breath from the public seemed to hang in suspense. The defendants, Valeria Torres and Victor Delgado, for committing slander and deliberately fabricating false stories in order to destroy personal honor and damage corporate reputation, are hereby sentenced to prison along with financial penalties for emotional and economic damages. A wave of murmurs immediately spread across the courtroom. Valeria broke into tears, rushing forward with a shrill cry. "No, I didn't do it alone. I was forced." But no one responded. Her sobs were swallowed by the stern atmosphere of the chamber. Victor only clenched his jaw, his eyes darkening. Martinez paused briefly, then continued. "The defendant, Camila Torres, for accepting money to publish false reports, is officially stripped of her journalism license and prohibited from working in the media field for 10 years. Camila collapsed forward, both hands covering her face. Her muffled sobs echoed through the room, saturated with despair. As for Mr. Hector Ramirez, Martinez looked directly at the teacher seated in the witness section. "Your discriminatory behavior toward students, which violates the ethics of your profession, results in suspension from duty and mandatory participation in a disciplinary investigation by the Education Board." Hector bowed his head, unable to utter a single word. The entire courtroom buzzed with whispers. Heads shook in disapproval, eyes full of disappointment, interlaced with a few weary sighs. Finally, the chief prosecutor lifted his gaze, his voice firm and unyielding. "Mr. Alejandro Montoya, founder of Montoya AI, there is no evidence whatsoever that you abandoned your daughter. All accusations are baseless. He is fully exonerated." The judge's gavel struck with authority. "This trial is adjourned." Outside the courthouse, swarms of reporters rushed forward. But this time, there were no more hostile questions. Instead came cheers, applause, and celebration. One reporter held up a newspaper featuring Isabella's essay, shouting, "Her mother's house has moved the entire nation to tears." Alejandro bent down and looked at Isabella. His daughter smiled, her eyes shimmering. He knew they had just stepped out of the darkness. In the days that followed, public opinion shifted. The Montoya Group, once shaken, began to recover. Shareholders returned, stocks rose, and confidence was restored. But more importantly, Alejandro's name was no longer tied only to AI technologies. It was now associated with the image of a father who had stood up for his daughter. At school, Isabella also experienced big changes. On her first day back in class after the trial, she hesitated as she rolled her wheelchair into the room. To her surprise, Mateo rushed forward to push her chair. A few other classmates stepped up, their faces flushed. "Isabella, we're sorry. We were wrong to believe those rumors." Another girl whispered shyly, "You're really talented. We admire you." Isabella smiled with trembling lips, her eyes brimming with tears. For the first time, she felt recognized by the very people who once turned their backs on her. Her essay, Mother's House, was no longer just a memory from the contest. It was published in a national education magazine and used as an example in many classrooms. Miss Elena Morales brought the magazine to Isabella herself, her voice emotional. "You wrote for an entire generation. Your essay will help many children understand that intelligence and a strong heart are more powerful than any hardship." One afternoon, in the familiar study room, the golden glow of sunset streamed through the wide glass windows. There were no longer computer screens shining through the night, no stacks of documents piled high. On the desk, there was only a hot cup of tea and a small notebook of poems that Isabella was still writing. Alejandro sat beside her, his hands gently resting on his daughter's shoulders. Isabella looked up, her voice small yet clear. "Dad, I never really lost Mom, because you have always been my support." Alejandro held her tightly, tears running down his face. His voice trembled, but it was steady. "I promise I will never leave you alone again. Never again." Isabella smiled and placed the notebook on the desk. On the last page, the childlike handwriting stood out. "When the light returns, the darkness has no place to hide." In the stretching rays of the afternoon sun, father and daughter sat side by side, with no distance between them. The wounds slowly closed, making way for a new journey, a journey of love, trust, and healing. A year had passed since the gavel echoed through the courtroom. The city had stopped talking about it. The newspapers that once ran sensational headlines had moved on to other topics. But inside the Montoya mansion, the real change was taking place. Alejandro was no longer the man who spent sleepless nights in front of server screens, no longer letting artificial intelligence consume his entire life. He had learned to leave the office early, learned to switch off his phone during dinner. The multi-million-dollar contracts were still signed, but they no longer came at the cost of his absence from his daughter's life. Isabella, now 8 years old, still sat in her wheelchair, yet her eyes had grown brighter. She continued with her therapy, sometimes making progress painfully slowly, but she was no longer alone in that journey. At every session, her father sat beside her, lifting her small arm, whispering words of encouragement. One afternoon after school, Isabella sat in the reading room with a pencil in hand. She was writing more lines of poetry, then she looked up toward the window. Alejandro walked in, carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. He set one in front of his daughter, then sat down next to her. "What are you writing?" he asked gently. Isabella handed him the notebook of poems, her cheeks flushed. "I'm writing about our home, not the one made of bricks and cement, but the one built from memories. I think maybe Mom would smile if she read it." Alejandro turned the pages slowly, his expression softening. The words were simple but profound, like brushstrokes painting over a once broken family portrait that was now healing. He gently placed his hand on her hair and whispered, "My little girl, you have taught me what true happiness really means." Isabella looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "Dad, before you used to chase after thinking machines. Now I see you've learned to think with your heart." Both father and daughter laughed. Their laughter rang out in the room that had once felt heavy, now light and free, like a spring melody. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched across the lawn. A puppy, the birthday gift Alejandro had given Isabella, ran circles around her wheelchair, barking as if eager to join in the joy. Isabella picked the puppy up, pressed her cheek against its soft fur, then looked at her father and said softly, "I don't need legs to know I can go far. All I need is you by my side, and this home." Alejandro wrapped his arms around his daughter. He knew the scars of the past would not vanish, but now they were no longer chains. They had become proof of a healing journey where a tech millionaire and his brilliant daughter had found their way back to each other, not in the shadows, but in the light of love. Dear friends, today's story comes to a close with a simple yet powerful message. In life, the wicked will always face consequences, while those who live with love, patience, and integrity will surely receive the reward they deserve. Valeria and her accomplices were ultimately punished by the law, while Isabella and her father found their bond in peace once again. This was not only a victory of justice, but also a triumph of compassion, faith, and the strength to carry on. My dear friends, as we follow these heartwarming stories, these touching stories, I believe each of us sees a reflection of ourselves somewhere in them. Perhaps it is in Isabella's strength, or in Alejandro's timely remorse and change. But what about you? If you were in this situation, would you have the courage to speak up for the truth like Isabella did? I also want to take a moment to ask about you. Have you been doing well lately? Is there something weighing you down, or maybe a small joy you would like to share? Don't hesitate to leave a comment. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for being with Story 4 Heart. I hope that each time we meet through these stories, your heart will be warmed a little more.